Hi again. We're going to work on modeling in some of the detail of the eye. Just wanted to point out a couple of changes I made to the mouth. I found that the lower lip was intersecting with my mandible, the incisors. You can see how procumbent her incisors are here. In fact, maybe I have to exaggerate a little more even. Um, but I had to pull these points out here to allow the teeth some room, and it actually worked out well because one structure I was having a hard time working in there is the feeling of if you look at anybody's or most people's underneath their lower lip, the receded area in here, but that doesn't persist going around the mouth. There's usually a bulge out in this area. If I go into object mode and sort of show you shaded a little bit. So you can see it kind of bulges out in this region. That's because there's a sort of pile up of muscles there. Of course, there's orbicularis oris going around the mouth, but also down here you've got things like depressor um, anguli oris, the depressor labii inferioris, so the ones that pull down the corner of the mouth, that pull down the lower lip. Um, and the mentalis muscle, which is down here. So you need to give some room to these, and it gives this distinctive bulge. Look at photos of anybody, and you'll see, well, most people, obviously not everybody's the same, but you'll see a lot of that structure recurring all the time. So receded in here, you can see that I've really gone away from that muscle there. I should probably pull this out, or that marker there. I should probably pull this out a little bit. Um, but I do want to put that structure in there. Oops. The bulge in this region. Anyway, and I've worked on the corner of the mouth a little bit to make it a little more reasonable. Um, and what I tend to do is model these things and then move my camera around. And from different angles, you can see the lines that are formed. And this is all looking pretty reasonable. The upper lip probably has to come out a little bit. The lower lip may even be a little more procumbent and out a little farther here. But anyway, I keep tweaking those things, but I just want to keep building in some more structure. So let's look at the eye. So you see we've got our big edge loop in here that's defining orbicularis oculi. Now we want to start to refine the detail in here. So we have to start adding some edge loops. We're going to add 6 edge loops in total, not all at once, but we're going to put some edge loops in to start getting the data. So we're going to use a new tool that will allow us to grab these points. If I go into low res mode, so it'll allow us to grab these points and stick them to the eyeball just temporarily. But it'll allow us to make a nice tight seal around the eye, which is what we want in this case. So to do that, you have to select the eye, and you have to, if you look up here at the top of the screen, there's a little horseshoe magnet, and you click on that, the eye will turn green. That means it's been made live. So anytime now when you move a point on another object, it's going to pop and stick to that. So we want to make sure we're doing this modeling from the front. I'm going to wireframe mode, and I'm just going to select the points on the edge of the eye here, and you won't be able to tell from the front view, but when I select it, it's got a little round circle around the center of the manipulator, and that means that it's going to snap to something. So when I just grab the circle and move a little bit, and you can't tell from the front view, but it does pop onto the eye. So you can see here that it's actually popped onto the eye. Right. So now these are on the eyeball. Take this one here and work in this detail. And I go here. Now I'm just not going to go right into the corner of the eye, just kind of the edge of the eye here, or like the drawing of my eye anyway, where it turns away from the view. Grab this one. You have to check and make sure these all actually stuck. Sometimes they don't. I'm going to pull these into where the edge of the semilunar membrane is. So I'm not going into the canthus, we'll work that out later, but just the edge of the eye where it meets the semilunar membrane. So let's look at this. So yeah, they all seem to pop in. You can see we're starting to build in the structure of the eye there. Now we need one more edge loop to actually get the corner of the eye, so let's go to object mode and go to edit mesh, insert edge loop, and we're just going to put one in here so we can get a line for the corner of the eye. Got a nice flow of the geometry, so we get an edge loop all the way along the head. And go to object mode again. Yep, that looks good. Now turn off, we don't want this one to snap to the eyeball. So just click on the magnet again and the eye will go back to normal. And let's select this. Oh, come on. Oops. Don't do that when you have anything selected. Just hit the magnet with nothing selected and that will make the eyeball not live anymore. If you click that while you have the face selected, then that will make the face live, which is not what we want. So let's just select this vertex and move it into the corner of the eye here. Move that back in a bit. Okay. So that's pretty good. Now I'm just going to make sure, you want to make sure things are flowing out of the eye onto the nose nicely. That looks pretty good. Everything is flowing out here. Okay, so now let's add another edge loop, and we're going to sort of help define the shape of the orbit, the margin of the orbit. So go into object mode, and oops, sorry. The easy way to access these commands is to hold down the space bar, and I can find these here. Insert edge loop. So I want to put one in here. Look at it in the front view. I may want to see my skull here in shaded mode in wireframe. So you can see my person is a fairly oblong sort of shaped orbit. So I'm going to kind of work that shape in a little bit by grabbing the vertices of this new edge loop that I created and sort of working this shape in. Now we're going to have another edge loop in the middle here later that's going to make that crease where the eyelid recedes back into the orbit. So don't try and work that in yet. Maybe pull this in a little bit. You don't have to match the orbit exactly, but just get the feeling of it in in the geometry. Oh, come on. Whenever you have these big heavy meshes, like the scan of the skull or the mandible on the screen, you'll find that performance goes down. Oh, I'm going to move this up and over. So I'm also modifying. So this will be the sort of orientation of the corrugator muscle here. So we want to work that in. Work these in a little bit. Okay, so that's pretty good. A little more detail in the eye there. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is actually to work in the edge of the eyelids so we can shape them a little bit. So we want to create a new edge loop in here and then pull it out to shape the eyelid. So object mode, hit Y because that was my last tool. Now I'm going to pull these out and forward, down or up, and to make that flat plane of the red part of the eyelid. Now I have to really kind of exaggerate it because if we go into the smooth mode, you'll see that unless you really exaggerate it, you won't see that plane very well at all. So I'm just going to go in and kind of move these around. I might do some of this in the perspective view, just relying on my handles here. trying to work in the shape as the, the way the eyelids go up and over and then back. We're leaving some room because we're going to put the canthus and the caruncle in here later. And you can see how that shape is already forming. Oops, I think that was too far. So you can see how the shape of the eyelid is getting worked in. So if you go into 3 mode, see when it's smoothed, there's not much of an edge there, so you even have to exaggerate it a little bit more. Now we're going to add more detail in later that will help define this sharp edge of the eyelid, but try and get it as fairly close as we can to start. Remember, the medial canthus is generally lower than the lateral canthus, but of course it depends on what the skull is telling you. Let's look at it from the front. So that's looking pretty good. Let's look at it from the side to make sure everything's flowing out of the eye well here. Now this looks like this eyelid is a little too high. Looks like selected. Oh, that's good. I'm just going to move that down a little bit. You may want to select these points. You see how we're nicely building in the structure slowly. Oh, don't want to make it look too mean. That's a little too high. If I look in 1 mode, you can see how much I'm exaggerating it to get the shape here. This looks pretty good. Everything seems to be flowing out the way we want it. Oops, yeah, turn off tissue depth markers of cranium. Might move these down a little bit. Now we're still going to add some more geometry to define the medial canthus, but I want to make sure we've got a nice space in there for it. Everything's flowing out of the eye well, because we want to have a nice divot in here too. But that looks pretty good. Let's see. Now we want to help refine this edge a little bit by adding an edge loop right inside the plane of the eye here. I'm going to move this one out a little bit too far. So we can go to object mode. You can hit Y again for insert edge loop. And when you go into 3 mode, you can see it helps to define that line a little bit just by putting that in there. Okay. Now the last thing we're going to do before the next tutorial, and I think this is maybe in a little too far, just before I do this, I'm going to go into here and maybe move this over a little bit. Okay, something like that. Now we're going to add one more edge loop going around the eye and push that back to get the fold over the eyelid. So edit mesh, insert edge loop. So just in like that. Actually, one thing I'm going to do before I do that, I'm going to put one edge loop in through where the canthus is going to be, the medial canthus. So just in here. Just to add a little more detail in there. Now, it looks crazy when it's in low res mode, so that's why you want to take a look at it in high res mode. And I'm going to grab this point here and just pull it out and forward a little bit. Oops. Tone this down a tiny bit. It's hard to see what I'm doing. It's in too deep. Just going to move that out, forward. Just making a nice little triangle in there. I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. It's a little crazy. I'm going to pull this point forward a tiny bit. You can see how we're roughing in the structure for the canthus is going to be, and the caruncle ultimately in the semilunar fold. So that's pretty good. Maybe it's a little deep in there. Just going to pull this stuff forward a little bit, but you just have to keep tweaking it and evaluating it. You can see I've got a nice flow out of the eyes onto the bridge of the nose. This is maybe a little too high. Okay. Now I'm going to do what I had said I was going to do a minute ago. I'm going to add another edge loop. You can always hold down the command bar or the space bar and go to recent commands here. Click on this and see some of the things you've done recently. So I'll insert another edge loop here. And if I look at it in the front view, you can see where I drew, you can see where I drew my line where the eye goes back. So I'm going to use this row of vertices to help define that. So this is going to help define the sort of the way the eye sits, and it's kind of interesting and characteristic of the face, and it's defined by the position of the eyeball, the orientation of the orientation of the eyelids, and also, the shape of the orbit. So it can be a fairly distinctive feature, and this is giving us enough detail so we can add in things like a fold. Oops. Let's go into X-ray mode here so I can see a fold hanging down over the eye. You're working on an older individual than I am, so you may want to try and work in a little of this sort of lateral fold of the skin over the eyelid. Pull this in so it's nicely positioned to make this shape, and then I can go here in the side view and push some of this back a little bit. You can see I have to exaggerate my eyelid a little more. I lost it a bit when I was in there tidying up a little bit in the low res mode. You have to evaluate from this perspective view, but this is where my deep part is going to be, so I may want to push this back quite a bit, and you can see that those ligaments naturally start to come out. Pull this forward a little bit where the canthus is going to be. Now I'm going to go and try and fix up that plane of the eye a little bit. It tends to go from sort of a horizontal plane to being more exposed vertically and laterally there, so I'll try and work that in. Oops. So you can see how you really have to exaggerate it. When you look at it in low res mode, it looks crazy. But ultimately we have to smooth this out, so we have to do what the smooth version is telling us is the right thing to do. Try and work in some of this shape here. It's looking a little squinty to me. Just got to keep reworking it. Don't make her him look surprised, but it's Just working the shape. And you can even, just like in the corner of the mouth, work over the fold of the eye a tiny, tiny bit, depending on how old your person is. Whoops, that looks funny. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I'm doing all this pretty fast. Although it probably seems very slow to you. uh, I mean, I spend more time on the final one, but that's pretty good though. I've got the shape in there. It's maybe exaggerated a little bit, but I've got the structure in here. Now, like I say, if you want to, if an older person, you may want to grab these lines and move them down and forward, and you can see how you can get pretty easily, because we've got nicely edge looped lines, can work in that fold there over the eye. Make them look a little bit older. That's kind of interesting. Now there's probably going to be there may be a bit of a pushed in a little bit here for an older person, except like they got hit in the head with a brick. That's not right. I mean, you may need to add a little more data to do that. I'm going to undo out of that because I don't want my person to look like that. She's younger. I just want to make sure I'm getting the plane of the eyelid right. This should probably come in a bit like that. Just look at some references of people and see how their eyelid tends to sit. Anyway, so I'm pretty happy with the way that it's working out. I'm going to probably refine this a little bit to work in the canthus there. But we'll come back in the next tutorial, just work in the canthus and finish up the eye.